Right, so welcome to today's episode of InfoSec Journeys. We are delighted to be joined by Geoff White. Thank you for taking the time out, Geoff. An investigative journalist who covers the technology space, the cybersecurity space, and I'm a real big fan of your work. You've covered so much breadth of the industry. You publish books about cyber attacks, which we're definitely going to get into. I love all that sort of stuff. The investigative reports you've done across BBC, Forbes, Audible, Channel 4, etc., and your podcast series. We've got so much to pick apart with you, Geoff, about the content you produce, how you've broken into journalism, how you've got to the stage you're at now with your investigative mindset, to pick that apart. But before we do that, let me throw it over to you, Geoff, for an intro. Tell us who you are and what you're all about.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Geoff White. I'm an investigative journalist. I've covered tech for, as you say, among others, Channel 4 News, BBC News, Sunday Times, and I'm also the author of a book called Crime.com, which is proudly displayed, I see, behind Ashley there on the windowsill.
You've noticed it.
Yeah. It doesn't look like it's been very well thumbed, but
well,
it's a signed copy, no less, as well.
You signed it.
Fantastic. Yeah. When
I
that case, don't open it. It'll be worth megabucks. It'll be worth millions one day.
I love the subtitle as well, From Viruses to Vote Rigging, how hacking went global. And you cover a lot of breadth of topics within the book. Tell us a bit about what kind of content you cover then.
Yeah, well, I mean, you've got to have a motivation, I think, for writing a book, because it takes a long time and it's quite hard work. And so the publisher approached me to write a book about cybercrime. They don't specialize in cybercrime or technology, this publisher, the general publisher. And I thought, well, there's loads of books about cybercrime, and I've read quite a lot of them. But what was interesting was looking around, there wasn't one. I was thinking about my mum. I was thinking, if I wanted to give my mum a book about cybercrime, what one would I give her? And there's really good books. I mean, Countdown to Zero by Kim Zetter about the Stuxnet attack is an amazing book. But God, it's very detailed, and I wouldn't really want to inflict that on my mum, because she's not interested in Iranian nuclear technology. But if you I was trying to think, okay, is there a book I could just give somebody and say, look, this is all of it from beginning to end in a really nice, accessible way that's kind of interesting, covers the ground, and there wasn't. Maybe I've missed it, maybe I've not seen it, and that seemed a huge gap. It's a huge issue, and there's no book that you can say to people, start here. This is I think if people are really interested in it and really into it, I don't think my book's the end of, it's not all they have to read. There's loads of others, but as a starting point, it's really good. So that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to kind of go, okay, why does hacking exist? Like, start with the sort of why and where it comes from, then move through all the different episodes and kind of come as much as we can right up to date, and so say, okay, this is why it's a current threat. And what I did there was I was trying to sort of split it down. I broke it down to three different groups. I was looking at nation state hackers, organized crime, and what I broadly called hacktivists. So very media savvy, media focused, perhaps lower skill level groups of people. And for me, what's interesting is looking at the attacks we've had over the last few years, and the really big attacks, they've all exhibited signs that those three groups are coming together. There's a convergence. So you've got governments borrowing from organized cybercrime. You've got governments also borrowing from hacktivists. You've got hacktivists starting to get into cybercrime. So there's mergers between these different zones. And I think that's why suddenly cyber is becoming this huge issue. It's partly because we're using computers more, but it's partly that these three groups have kind of merged together and swapped tactics and tools and resources. So that's what I was trying to get to in the book.
Nice. One thing I really do enjoy about the book is the tone of the language. It's not dumbed down to a point where myself as a technologist would find it boring, but there is still detail in this book which I do quite enjoy. So I definitely want to give you kudos for that. I do enjoy the storytelling element of it.
I'm really glad you said that, because it's a fine balance. And to be honest, I've had this the whole time we've been covering tech, particularly for TV, trying to basically explain stuff in a way that's accurate, but also not boring and compelling. Is really difficult. And my approach was to sort of say, well, okay, I'm going to try and include enough detail in the book that even folks who understand and know the story will think, oh, I didn't know that bit, but try and explain all that detail in a way that a member of the general public can keep up with. So hopefully you hit, and it sounds like manage that, in your case anyway, where people who understand the language really easily still find out something they didn't know, a fact they didn't know, and people who don't know the facts don't know that you don't understand the territory can understand the language. So it was a challenge, but I'm glad you feel we got there.
I think as well, I mean, some of the stories that you cover and the scenarios, the real world scenarios, right? I mean, one of my particular favorites, and it's one of my favorites because not that I lived through it, but I was working in the financial industry at the time, relates to the Bangladesh Bank Heist, right? So it was a busy day in the office when that came out in the press. I can tell you, looking for, we had Swift terminals and we were looking at logs and all the rest of it, all weird and wonderful fun stuff that we were looking at. But I guess, so actually, to your point there, investigating and reporting on that side of things is one thing, but actually making that all of that kind of complicated attack knowledge translatable to the general public, that's a real skill. How do you kind of research? I mean, what Swift is, all of the complexities around the attack that happened and stuff. How do you actually do your research around it to get to a point where you can translate it?
It's a really interesting one, that, and the question isn't how you do because the research, to be honest, is I wouldn't say it's easy. It's simple in that you just go to the internet and you just read, just keep reading and reading and reading, and increasingly everything you read, you think, yeah, I know that bit, I know that bit, I know that bit. So the research isn't necessarily the difficult bit. It's knowing when to stop. It's thinking, I don't have to get into that other bit of that. I don't really need to understand that. Because that's just a leap too far. So it's kind of, you basically go out into the territory, you read and read and read and read, you amass this folder of stuff. So I used a package called Scrivener, which I hadn't come across before, but it's a screenwriting piece of software, and it's amazing. You can Scrivener's. So if you know, there's a film called Memento by Christopher Nolan, which is all done in flashbacks and that kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
What you can do with Scrivener is, if you write a film like that, you can press a button and it automatically puts everything in chronological order. And then you can rearrange it and jumble it out of order. But at any stage, you can snap back to put it all in timeline order. Or you can press a button and it will show you every scene with a particular character in it. It's an amazing piece of software. Wow. But it's really good for journalism, for writing as well, because you can import everything. So you can import documents as PDFs, you can import videos, you can import images. And so everything that I read, I would archive it and bank it into Scrivener. And for two reasons. Number one, it's all there. Number two, Scrivener was great for concentration, because when I was coming to write the thing, I didn't have the internet open, if you like, on my computer. I had everything in Scrivener, and I was just writing away. And if I needed to look at something, I had all the documents there. And so I wasn't tempted to go to the internet and then get sidetracked looking at cat videos for 3 hours. It's like, as soon as you open up Scrivener, you're in that environment and you're just writing and concentrating. So it's really useful from that perspective. But the other thing, and this is what stuff you find out about book writing nobody tells you, references is just the most ball aching thing. And to have all the references just there so that you can click and do it, it saves so much time. So in terms of the research, that was kind of how I handled it.
So in terms of the fact checking though around it, how do you get that kind of confidence that the stuff you're reading online and documenting is actually, what happened?
It's the classic thing of two sources for everything. But there are things, and I'll just be honest about this. There are things in the book where there are conflicting accounts. The Bangladesh Bank story is a great example. If you tot up the different figures that different people worked out for that, there's something like a $17 million difference at the end of the day between what happened. And so you have to basically say, well, I'm going to take this, and as long as you're honest with the reader and say, I'm taking this as my guide, and this is what they said. Conflicting reports vary. That's one thing. But another issue I had, so the US presidential election, we cover obviously the hacking of the 2016 election. I wanted to just report the result, because obviously Hillary Clinton got more votes, but Donald Trump got in because of the way the US election works. So I wanted to kind of cover that, and I wanted to put the figure in how many votes they got. So I went to the BBC website. BBC, good source, looked at it. And before we published the book, I was like, okay, I'll just go through one more time and just fact check. I thought, that can't be wrong, but I'll just check it. And sure enough, there was a different figure somewhere else. I think Fox or Politico had a different figure. So I was thinking, well, there must be some US government website that puts out the figure. I couldn't bloody well find it. Anyway, so stuff like that just terrified me. And there's a certain point where you just have to you have to just quote a source, and if somebody comes back and says, "Oh, that source I disagree is a different one here," you come out and say, "Well, at least I've told you the source, and you can disagree."
Yeah.
It gets to the point of what is a fact, and how do you know a fact? And that's quite, it's almost like a philosophical conundrum you end up dealing with.
Well, yeah, I was just thinking, while you were talking about that fact checking is, writing a book about technical and real life events, like you said, must be absolutely um, so challenging to do, especially when misinformation is so ripe on the internet. How do you? Is there a place you can go? And I know that some of these websites do exist where you could say, "This is the fact that I want to know, and it's 100% true." Like, how does the normal person even figure out what's real on the internet anymore?
I tell
It's
you what, I'll give you the answer there. I watched a fantastic video, Geoff, that you did about Google dorking, like
Ah,
to
yeah, okay.
Johns
oh
Hopkins
yes,
universities and how to validate, and that's something I genuinely shared with my family as well.
yeah,
And like,
yeah,
stop asking me, just watch this video. This
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
nice man explains it for you.
Just
So
effing Google it. Yeah, yeah,
basically, yeah.
it's true. I mean, I there are certain sources that have more credibility than others. The BBC, whatever you think of the BBC, they do a great deal of fact checking to make sure the facts are right. What they cover and sort of what their correspondents think is one thing, but once something goes on the BBC website, generally they've done a pretty good job of fact checking it. Reuters, AP, these are other sort of newswire sources that do a great deal of work. There's also people that I've read their work and I know their work. So we've mentioned Kim Zetter, the woman who wrote Countdown to Zero, fantastic journalist. And you read that book, you know that's somebody who's done a lot of research. So if that person comes out with something, again, I'm inclined to put it in as a source and say, look, this is legit. My worry with this is there's a great quote in the Intelligence and Security Committee report about Russian interference, which came out in July. And they said something along the lines of, one of their witnesses said something along the lines of, when people get to the stage of saying you can't believe anything these days, or who knows what the truth is, the disinformation merchants have won. The point of fake news and disinformation isn't actually to get out fake news; it's to make you doubt all news.
Yeah.
And that terrifies me if we're in
That's
that
very
situation.
powerful. Yeah.
It's worrying. Yeah. So you just have to sort of say, look, I've been there, I've seen this, I've witnessed it. That's first-hand testimony. Everything else apart from that, you're trying to look at how reliable it is and how kosher it
Incredible.
is, I suppose.
Yeah, and I see it within my own family. You'll have someone sending you a link, and the minute I see that the first part of that URL says Facebook, and I think, oh God, here we go. And you get it all the time. So it's just, I think if someone's a technologist, you're a little bit more skeptical on what you might see on the internet, and might want to Google it again or look on. Well, Twitter's probably not the best place either, but you might want to look in other places. But yeah, I think it's interesting if you're writing a book of the caliber you've written, the fact checking process must be extensive. And I was, so how did this all start for you then? Where did you start getting into journalism or the technology side of things?
I would wanted to get into the industry for a while, and actually, what prompted it was the dot-com crash. I was working for an internet company at the time, and the company went under. And it was like the guy came in at 9 o'clock in the morning and said, "Clear your desks," and we hit the pub at 12. We were still there at
All right.
10 at night. That was a bad night. And so after I thought, well, what do I do? And I've been thinking about journalism, and because I was then unemployed, you could sign up for this journalism course, and it cost £10 instead of, I think, a couple of thousand, because it's a discount for unemployed people. So I went down there with I literally paid with a £10 note and signed onto this course. And that was a 6-month training course. Then I went to local papers. I did the classic, I learned shorthand. That's how long ago and how traditional we're talking. Still useful. So did that, and then started working on magazines. And the magazine I was working for was Broadcast Magazine. And from there, I went into broadcasting. So I went into radio and then into TV and now back to radio. And now I do a bit of everything. So that was, broadly speaking, how I got into it.
How did you? Because to the outsider, there's a clear difference between writing the journalistic writing content and then the audio content, and then almost writing stuff for visual as well as the video kind of stuff as well. But as you say, you cover all bases now. Do you have like a preference where you start? I mean, back in the day, was it all kind of columns and articles and magazines and stuff? Is that the kind of bread and butter? Or
when I started out, the idea that I would ever end up being able to work in TV was, wow, that would be amazing. And having now worked in TV and done TV, it's good. Don't get me wrong, but there are limitations. TV's like an oil tanker. You point it at a target, and when it hits the target, it will probably demolish it. But it's very difficult to turn that round. Great example, when the Pope came to visit the UK, it's a papal visit, and it was the first one in however many years. And all the news networks like, oh my God, a papal visit. So they dispatched satellite trucks and correspondents and cameras, and people lined the route with flags and stuff. And honestly, I'm not saying nobody turned up. All I'm saying is the thronging crowds did not run. And that you could almost hear in newsrooms around the country, and users going, "Get the trucks back quick! Where's our cameras? Oh, the cameras in bloody Scotland, because he's going to land in Scotland first." Like, you can't change direction. It's not very nimble, TV news, and also you can't do detail. I remember trying to explain things like ransomware in TV news, and that hacking is not an easy subject to cover. Also, pictures. There are no pictures. I mean, a war in Syria, there's pictures of people blowing each other up. In cybersecurity, there's no pictures. So what's interesting now is I really love working across all the different mediums because if somebody's got good picture, and I know it's a fun story, we go and film it. But the stories now where I think that's never going to work for telly, so I just pitch it as a written piece, and I can make it, or I can make a podcast out of it. And this resurgence of podcast, of frankly radio, suddenly you're able to do much more. There's things at the moment we're covering. I'm doing a podcast actually about the Bangladesh Bank Heist.
I love it.
And there's stuff with that. I mean, that's all over the world. There's no way we could afford to go to these places to film. So being able to do that over the phone or over the internet these days, make a podcast out of it's really good. So I love it. I absolutely love working.
What kind of detail are you going into then? Because I know you did the Darknet Diaries on the Bangladesh, where, I mean, I'd love to know how that came about, if I'm honest, because we're both massive fans of Darknet Diaries.
He's great, Jack, isn't he?
Yeah, he's an unbelievable storyteller and story writer.
Yep.
But yeah, what's the motivation as a piece of work then for Bangladesh specifically? What are you looking to get out of the podcast?
Well, the Bangladesh Bank job, which for new readers, alleged North Korean hackers broke into Bangladesh Bank and tried to steal $1 billion. Only got away with 81 million. But also have hit a lot of banks and increasingly cryptocurrency exchanges since. So their winnings from the Bangladesh Bank job have been dwarfed really by the stuff they've got elsewhere. So that's a chapter in the book, and it's my favorite chapter in the book. You're not supposed to have. It's like children. You're not supposed to have a favorite, but we all do. Sorry, Amy. So I pitched it as a podcast to the BBC. I said, look, this is a fantastic story. It's almost, what I love about that story is it's like somebody's watched a Hollywood heist movie.
It is.
And they've thought, how would we do that in cyberspace? And they've done it. They've just gone ahead and done it. So it maps out in a beautifully episodic way. There's a North Korean element, which is just fascinating. It's endlessly fascinating, really, that country, and how a country that's completely sort of off beam, just out. It's such a bizarre and intriguing country. So there's all of that stuff, but there's also, of course, what predates it. We're going into the Sony case and the hacking of Sony, and also what postdates it, the WannaCry episode, and then the subsequent cryptocurrency stuff. So you've got this amazing arc that you can work across. I mean, the series will sort of span a good 30 years or so. I think we're going to start in the mid-90s.
I can't wait for that.
Oh my gosh, I can't wait
really
for
good
this.
fun. We're discovering new stuff. The Bangladesh Bank thing, there's stuff that's not. You ask 5 different people about one element of that story, and you get 5 different answers. And what I'm really looking forward to is actually being able to do the definitive, here's what happened when, because I think we all know roughly what happened. It's like, well, yeah, but what was the order? And there's still stuff in there that we're finding out that's not come out before.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I always remember, I mean, one of the reasons I asked you that question about kind of fact checking and research on these complex issues is one of the examples around Bangladesh I remember is like a lot of the train of thought was like, oh, well, they were infiltrated because they were running like $9 routers on the perimeter, and it was obviously a security weakness that someone took advantage of. And then it's like, oh no, actually, it was a phishing email by a malicious resume, CV, that kind of thing. And there's clear evidence in the US, what's the indictment against the North Korean hackers, etc., which go into detail around that. So, like you say, there's so many bits, little snippets of conflict information. It's fascinating. I'm so fascinated, and I cannot wait to listen to this podcast when it's produced. And I have some of the malware actually that was used in that attack, and it's part of a study that I did to reverse engineer that and analyze it and stuff. And there's all sorts of weird stuff that that is present in that malware, which is fascinating to explore as well. So,
and do you think that's weird stuff because it's from North Korea? Do you think they think differently?
One of the most surprising things, I mean, what I've always found, I've spent the last kind of 6, 7, 8 years, what have you, reverse engineering malware, especially nation state level stuff. And the malware generally blends in to the normal BAU crappy malware that's out there, because they don't want to burn all their 0 days. They don't want to burn all their exploits on, a particular attack if they don't need to. And this one seemed like, what I was so surprised about is there is next to no layer of obfuscation in the malware. Like, you can just almost read not the source code, but it's effectively in plain text. They're not hiding anything, because I don't think they were necessarily looking to get caught, right? And so it's quite easy to identify what the malware is designed to do and what stages it works at, and how it interferes with the printer and stuff like that. You know what I mean?
That's interesting. Yeah, and that's presumably why we've got so much detail about it, is because security researchers can.
Yeah, because it's not encrypted. There's a layer of obfuscation, but it's very easy to bypass. It's not, it's not protected in a way that, if I was to write just a commercial piece of software that I was going to sell, or to protect my source code, I would like pack it, obfuscate it, encrypt it, all the rest of it, and make it hard for someone to reverse engineer. And they haven't done that. So that's what's pretty interesting.
And actually, didn't they? There was a thing where they used TLS to disguise the traffic going in and out.
Yeah, like fake TLS.
Yeah. They didn't actually go through with it. So they made it look like it was that kind of traffic, but actually it wasn't. So you could have read it. It's just that the computers weren't.
Yeah, that is absolutely true. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, it's fascinating, and you think there's so many questions. I'd love to speak to these guys and say, why did you do it like this? Why did you do that? Just design decision, but ultimately, I guess we'll never get there. But honestly, I can't wait for that series. That will be a fascinating insight.
Yeah.
So, what do you think? So, from the North Korean perspective, which, like you said, is very interesting, because I think it adds that element of mystery. And I think that's why anything coming out of North Korea could be made into a film, or is being made into films. What do you think North Korea's main motivation for most of this is? Financial gain, power? What do you see from your investigations?
I think, well, the stuff we see, I think, is money motivated, and there's a really interesting timeline if you look at the sort of geopolitical timeline of it. I think it's 2013, North Korea gets hit with UN sanction 1294, which of course we're all familiar with.
Of course,
that is.
I've got a post-it note here.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Who's a big poster on the wall of the UN sanctions? So that is basically, North Korea was testing nuclear missile, or testing missile technology. There was worries about nukes, and so the sanction came along, and this restricted them from the international financial system and bulk transfers of cash. So suddenly, North Korea's already limited ability to move money around just gets almost turned off. And that was 2013, I think I'm right in saying. And within a year, that they're sniffing around banks and so on. There's been a long history with North Korea as well, certainly according to the US government. And that's the other thing. A lot of this is coming out of the US government. You do have to kind of test these premises sometimes. But again, according to them, North Korea has been into things like counterfeit currency, been into movement of drugs, been into sort of illicit and counterfeited goods generally. We interviewed an FBI agent who claimed that he'd been asked to set up a crystal meth laboratory in North Korea, and that this would work on a revenue split with the North Korean government. So,
You couldn't write it. It's unbelievable.
It's crazy.
But this is the thing, because North Korea's, it's so hard for us to understand this country. It is so outside just the normal run of things that to understand its motivations, I think, is really difficult. I mean, but money just seems to be something, and that's obvious, because trading internationally is difficult. I mean, they make ginseng and mushrooms, I think, are two of the things they sort of do make and export legitimately. I read a thing the other day, and I don't know whether this is true, but it's an interesting thing where Samsung and LG bought gold for their smartphones from North Korea, but without knowing it had actually come from North Korea.
Wow.
So the country sort of does trade, but it's just all its trade has to be shonky because it's kind of cut off from the international community. I mean, wouldn't it be wonderful if the regime there goes and the country's opened up, but you'd have to open up in a way where you'd have to do it in a really careful way, wouldn't you? If a new regime came in that was open to opening up to the world, I mean, there's so many sort of damaged people psychologically in that country. Tourists coming along and photographing them would be tricky. But wouldn't it? It's the country in the world I would love to go to probably most.
Yeah, it would be absolutely fascinating holiday, wouldn't it? Let's be honest.
Wouldn't be a holiday, but
No.
That's true.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess touching on a similar topic, you produced a podcast series on the dark web, which I really enjoyed. How did that come about then? Was that something that you through your knowledge and awareness of the dark web wanted to kind of bring to light, or is it something that was?
I was commissioned to make that one, and it. I've never actually sort of talked about this. It's not a sort of particular secret. It's just a kind of bizarritude. We got pitched a story. Somebody said that they knew the guy who invented Bitcoin, Satoshi Nakamoto.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Who doesn't know him? Yeah.
Well, exactly. Yeah. So, this is a worldwide scoop. So this guy comes in. We're like, oh my God, might actually be meetings,
Wow,
and the chap who'd been pitched this didn't know anything about technology. So he got in touch with me at Channel 4. It's a colleague of mine at ITN, which makes Channel 4 News. And he said, look, you work at Channel 4 News. You know all about tech. Come down and meet this guy and just vet him and see whether. And I mean, really, he had an iPhone 4. And I was like, this is
what's one of them?
It's a long time after iPhone 4. And I just looked and thought, if you're really Satoshi Nakamoto, would you really be? That was the first sort of clue. Guy was a total fantasist.
Wow.
But the colleague of mine at ITN who met this guy, we were talking about things, and he said, oh, the dark web, that's fascinating, isn't it? And so they pitched a series on the dark web to Audible, and we got it commissioned. And again, you should go into these things thinking, oh, well, I've been covering the dark web for ages. I'm sure everybody knows about it. We're not going to cover anything new, but you find out all this new stuff that you didn't know. And the main thing about the dark web was, because it works on two levels. You've got the sort of routing, the kind of internet routing protocol, but you've also got the publishing protocol that goes on top of it. So what that means is all these dodgy websites where, all this dodgy stuff goes on, you didn't have to have them. You could have just had the internet routing protocol without allowing publishing on that protocol of hidden sites, the Tor hidden services. So when the penny dropped, we were lucky enough to interview one of the guys who developed the Tor protocol. And I said to him, so why did you do that? You must have known these sites were going to get used for dodgy stuff. And his answer was really interesting. He said, when they invented the car, criminals used cars to get away from crime scenes really quickly, and the police were left behind. But we didn't outlaw the car, So I thought it was a really interesting argument. I'm not sure that I entirely agree with it, but it's an interesting argument.
That's fascinating. I've never heard that before, and now that you kind of surface that, it is really an obvious question. Like, why would it, like the U.S. Navy kind of banned it as like, this was a protocol for us to communicate securely overseas and all the rest of it in privacy and anonymity. But in order to be anonymous, everyone has to kind of use the platform and service.
Yes,
but
exactly. Yes,
it doesn't mean to say you have to host content. Yeah.
I mean, there's
maybe that drives the traffic. I don't know.
There's a technical reason for it, in that to be truly anonymous, obviously, when you go into the internet using Tor protocol, once you've washed around in that system, once you bounce out at the other end and you hit the websites that you're going to, then you come out of Tor, if you like. So the idea of inventing these sites was they would sit within Tor, and you would enter the Tor maze, as it were, be able to visit the website and then come out without ever sort of revealing yourself. So I think that was the logic. I probably not explained it very well, but that was the logic. But yeah, it seemed tailor-made for kind of nefarious purposes. So, yeah.
So what about? Sorry, Grash, go on.
No, go on. I was going to say. So I don't use Tor at all anymore. Years ago.
Anymore.
But, years
my
ago,
drug days are behind me.
Yeah, that's long gone. But you'd be running the Tor browser because everyone told you it was a safe way to surf the internet, and you'd be using Tor exit nodes. But through your research and what you've seen and people you've spoken to, I know the dark web is used a lot for illicit trade, but is it really used that much anymore? Are people still using the Tor to trade wares and hacking tools X, Y, and Z? I just don't think that's really the case much.
I think you're right to a certain extent. I don't know what the usage figures are, and there's you can check on the Tor project website, and it shows you the usage numbers. They got a boost actually after Snowden, so I know there's been a boost in numbers.
Yeah, no surprise.
I think Tor is. There's been a number of factors in this. Number one, police takedowns and exit scams, where site owners just disappear with the money. Police infiltration. There's been significant cases, and each one of those damages the trust. I mean, the Hansa and AlphaBay takedown was a sort of case in that. Yeah. So I think that's damaged the trust, but as far as I'm aware, a lot of the hacking infrastructure still relies on Tor. So if you're going to send commands on your command and control server, you might use Tor to do that. If you're going to, I don't know, obfuscate some particular element of your hacking campaign, Tor can be used as a sort of tool to do that. So I think it still gets traffic from there. There are still loads of sites you can go to, and you can buy drugs, and you can buy drugs, and you can buy sort of hacking software and so on. But increasingly, my sense for those sites is they're increasingly shop windows, because I think the trade is going on encrypted apps. And I think that's what's really chewed away at Tor, is this idea of, well, if we want to communicate securely, we've got Signal, we've got Telegram, we've got WhatsApp and actually iMessage and so on, that end-to-end encrypted. And so I think, that sort of maybe chipped away at Tor's.
What was that recent? I can't remember the name of it now, but the police, was it the Dutch police busted open that that mobile phone platform provider? I can't remember the name of them though.
Was it EncroChat? Have I got that right?
That's the one. Yeah, you're right. Yeah. And the NCA had a field day with that, right, in the UK. So that goes to show exactly what you're saying there. I think this kind of offline, well, not offline, but kind of off the radar encrypted communication seems to be where everything is at. The shop window idea is very interesting. I have now and again some involvement with the IWF, the Internet Watch Foundation, around the kind of CSAM issue, working for a content provider, and so or a service provider, I should say, not a content provider. But the what's really interesting actually is that they say, yes, the dark web is used for child pornography and abuse and all the rest of it, but actually the problem still largely exists on the what do you call it, the surface web, the normal internet kind of thing. It's surprising that it's not all shifted over to this murky world that we paint it in. So
yeah. I mean, it's it's an interesting thing that basically dark web site owners do not want to appear on the radar of law enforcement, and one surefire way to do that is to host child sexual abuse material. So there's some very prosaic reasons why a dark web site owner would say, no, we don't want any of that stuff. It's not because they morally object to it,
against
because it's bad for business. So I think that's an interesting sort of point that the IWF make.
You've got such a rich background and history in journalism and in investigative journalism across technology, and we touched upon where it started for you, and your kind of your growth within this space. How would you advise people to kind of break into this industry in the modern day? With all of certainly, I guess post COVID as well. Whether there's more barriers to entry into the industry. How would you kind of advise on that?
In terms of journalism, the journalism industry, you mean?
Yeah, I guess investigative journalism, and I guess specifically around technology as well, which is obviously the fun stuff. So
yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's brilliant in a way. It's changed. I talked about when I first entered journalism, I still learned shorthand. Like, that's how long ago it was. It's changed immeasurably, and it's changed for the better. And the great thing about it is, we used to, even as recently as the sort of, what was it, 20 years ago, so when I started training, journalists and publishers were still sort of the gatekeepers. You couldn't get on telly. This is pre-YouTube. You couldn't get on telly without somebody putting you on telly, unless you want to do sort of public access, the public access cable stuff. But now you can, frankly, if you want to get into telly, start making YouTube videos and put them on YouTube. There you go. You guys have done yourself. It's that simple. And the wonderful thing is, I get the wonderful, maybe not wonderful in some other ways. I suspect audiences care a little bit less about quality now than they did before. One of the things we used to do in TV and we used to obsess about was polish. We're going to make everything polished. Everything's got to be seamlessly edited. The camera angles have got to be, just so. And, you never sort of see any of them sort of shakes or wobbles or anything like that. And I look actually now at some of the really popular content, and it has those wobbles in it. And if you look at podcasts and how podcasts work, a lot of what people like, I think, about podcasts is the fact that presenters on podcasts, you've talked about Jack Rysider at Darknet Diaries. One of the things is him thinking out loud and going, I don't understand this. So how does this work? That would be unforgivable in a sort of, professional journalism column. You never sort of see it. And one of the things I did with my own podcast, Cybercrime Investigations, was to sort of say, go down the blind alleys and say, so I went down this blind alley and I spent 2 weeks researching and it didn't go anywhere. You'd never see that as part of professional journalism. So I feel like for people wanting to get into this area, you can just write your own blog, make your own podcast, put your own YouTube video up. Even if it's rubbish at first, don't worry, because that's practice. Number one. Number two, you'll get the hang of it and it'll improve, and you'll work out what you do want to say and how you do want to say it, and you can progress, you can practice. I wasn't given a practice newspaper to work on before I became a journalist. But also for me as a journalist, trying to find commentators and interviewees, first thing I'll do is Google them, and if they've got a YouTube channel or a podcast or blog, I'll read it so you can see what this person's like. So if you're wanting to get into the media as being a guest or being an expert or a commentator or contributor, putting up some YouTube videos of yourself, having a website, writing a bit, this sort of helps. And the other thing that I'd say is there are people I know who write fantastic blogs who are basically journalists, but they're lawyers or they're technology people, tech security people. But you read their blog and you can read it like you would read a publication. And again, I think for the public, the idea that, this person's an expert in the field and this person's a journalist, that's breaking down. You can read a blog and think, well, this person's an expert and a good journalist. So I think it's a really rosy future. I think the future's quite bright for people who want to break into it.
So yourself, you seem extremely technical anyway from our conversations, or well, you at least appear very technical, which is amazing. So would you say you're a journalist first or a technologist first? I know you worked in technology before entering journalism, but how have you kept that balance, or how have you kept that level of technology knowledge?
I'm a journalist first. I wouldn't pretend to be a techie or an expert in that way. And I think that's quite important, because my job isn't to understand all the tech. My job is to understand enough of the technology to be able to explain it accurately and comprehensively to an audience. I think at the point where I start becoming a techie, there's a risk that I lose the audience. And actually, the podcast I'm working on at the moment, I'm working with a producer who is not a techie at all. And that's really helpful, because I can sometimes say things or put things in the script and she goes, no, actually, I don't understand that. So working with somebody, choosing a second line of defense between getting too incomprehensible for the audience.
I think so many roles that we've spoken to people about throughout this series, and we come across in InfoSec, working in industry. One of the core skills is translating that information into non-technical audiences and stuff like that. And it seems to feature throughout every kind of role. It doesn't matter if you're C-suite level in execs or you're in an analyst world, etc. It's amazing, really.
And also, my experience of the people who control the money, they're not generally techies, and being able to, frankly, if you want to improve the tech, you've got to get the money. Somebody's got to release some budget to you so you can hire these people or do this particular thing. Being able to just present a compelling case as to why, is really useful. It's kind of, it's classic sales skills, isn't it? It's like, what's your story? Why do you want the money? It's not about the money. It's always about the story. So I think storytelling skills can be, can do that. And also, I mean, practical experiences and war stories and stuff, people love that. You like, if you think about it, as human beings, we've always learned through stories, like campfire stories. Stories are how we share information between each other. So if you're trying to sort of convince somebody to give you extra budget or to do a particular thing, whatever, telling them a story is a key way of imparting the information to them. So I think stories are really powerful from that perspective.
I think the advice you've given, I've written so many notes already about, what you've spoken about, how people can put themselves out there. A phrase I often use to people, especially when starting out in like the malware space, is just start before you're ready, because you're never going to think you're ready or good enough kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that really resonates. But I've noticed Scrivener. I'm going to put that in my arsenal for the next time I put some kind of content together. I think that's going to be really powerful.
Have a look at it.
It's
interesting.
Yeah. Fantastic.
So I was going to one question I was going to ask you before we end up is, you see a lot of the negative sides to cybersecurity, and we interviewed Jessica Barker a few weeks ago, and one of the things that she talks about is, well, no one actually focuses on the positives. Like, there is, you try and Google positive cybersecurity stories, you probably won't find any. So what do you think? Like, from your perspective and your lens, what do you think we are doing well with?
The depressing truth about this is loads of stuff that goes well. That old thing of the thieves, the enemy only has to be right once, and the bad guys only have to be right once, and we have to be right all the time. The problem is, for me as a journalist, I'm interested in the bits that don't go well. There are people whose job it is to talk about the stuff that goes well and that works out well, and they're called PR people, and that's their job, and it's really good. So I do think, for me, you're inevitably going to get the bits that went wrong. But I do think Jess is right there, and I've got a lot of time for Jess, and she's done a lot of work on this. And yeah, she's absolutely right. The thing that really annoys me isn't so much me as a journalist covering the negative stuff, because that's kind of what I do. It's in companies and institutions themselves. It's the cybersecurity function being sort of branded as being this kind of negative, overbearing thing. Like, you did not get your password right, you clicked on the email, and I feel that's where a lot of the negativity that I see as probably not good comes in. How about like a bottle of champagne for the best password? That's worth doing, is it not? There's a lot of stick and not a lot of carrot comes into these things. So I just feel, in organizations, you've got to get the balance between sort of saying to people, look, this stuff matters, and you could damage the company very badly by this, but you've also got to somehow sweeten that pill by saying, look, we're going to empower you with this information. You're going to be, you're going to be part of this, and actually, when you've done a good job, we're going to congratulate you. This department didn't click on any phishing emails this month, so they get to go karting or something. That's not for that, but do you see what I mean? Like, as something to sort of say, look, when you've done well, we congratulate you, rather than just.
Yeah, that's so true. Very true indeed. Geoff, thank you for taking the time to speak to us.
It's been a pleasure.
If I'm honest, I could keep going and going and going and never let you go. And I'm super excited to see and hear your podcast on Bangladesh in particular. But the other content that you've produced, which is exceptional, we'll definitely link in the show notes here as well. And I definitely encourage people to go and check out, and also get your book crime.com, which is doing really well on Amazon. So well done for that. Thank you for sharing the insights into how you got started, where it all began, the kind of stuff you work on, the kind of cool stuff that goes down in cybersecurity. I think is really going to resonate well. So thank you.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for having me. Take care.